Richard Davenport's briefcase thudded onto the hall floor. In his hand, he clutched a teddy bear, a ridiculous bribe for his own children. The house vibrated with a low hum, and irritation mingled with cold determination. He had come to dismiss the nanny today. Walking through the living room, he pushed open the door to the kitchen and froze. A speaker pulsed with purple light on the stone island, and nearby on the table, his sons, Leo and Sam, danced self-forgetfully. Their faces, usually closed, glowed with delight. Amelia, the girl he had come to fire, was dancing with them. "That's it, feel your feet," she said with a smile. The boys didn't hear her, but they felt the rhythm. Their silent laughter deafened Richard. He looked at their happiness, and all his resolve evaporated. A lump formed in his throat, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. For 2 years after his wife's death, Richard had sought refuge in his work. He provided for his sons, but shut himself off from them with silence. Leo and Sam, deafened after childhood illness, had finally withdrawn into their quiet world after their mother's death. A string of qualified nannies had been unable to break through their aloofness. Amelia Rose, a young girl with no education, but a desperate need for work, was the last chance. Richard agreed to hire her with skepticism, setting a strict probationary period. "Good morning, Leo." "Good morning, Sam," Amelia said with a deliberately cheerful smile as she placed plates of pancakes in front of the boys. "Look, I poured maple syrup on them, just like you like." Her response was absolute silence. The boys began to eat without looking up at her. "I've been thinking," she persisted. "Maybe after breakfast we could build the tallest tower with the building blocks, taller than the chandelier." No reaction. They finished eating in silence, pushed their chairs back in silence, and left the table, leaving her alone in the huge kitchen. The first few days consisted of such one-sided conversations and empty stares. On the third day, as she sat in the living room watching Sam and Leo rearrange the blocks, a garbage truck roared past the house. The huge windows trembled slightly from the vibration. Amelia noticed Leo freeze, then slowly walk over to the glass and press his palm against it. His eyebrows rose in surprise. At that moment, something clicked in Amelia's head. The next morning, she struggled to drag a large, well-used speaker into the house. The boys watched her actions with curiosity. She placed the speaker in the middle of the playroom, plugged it in, and turned on a track with deep, rolling bass. The room was filled with a low, palpable rumble. Amelia approached Leo, took his hand, and gently placed his palm on the vibrating body. The boy jerked his hand away, but his eyes flashed with interest. She repeated the same thing with Sam. He did not pull away, but instead placed his other hand on the speaker, trying to understand the source of the strange sensations. Then Amelia sat down on the floor and gestured for them to come to her. Placing their hands on the parquet, she smiled. "There it is, the music," she whispered. "You can touch it." That evening, Richard came home later than usual. The house was quiet, but in the living room he stumbled upon scattered sofa cushions. He frowned and went upstairs, where he heard muffled, rhythmic slaps. In the playroom, Amelia and the boys were sitting on the floor, clapping their hands on the parquet floor in time with the bass. "What's going on here, Amelia?" he asked dryly, stopping in the doorway. The girl flinched and quickly got to her feet. "Mr. Davenport." "We're playing," she replied, trying to hide her excitement. "They can feel the vibrations. We've found a way to play with the music." He scanned the room with an icy gaze. "This looks like a mess," Richard snapped. "Besides, Mrs. Henderson called me. The neighbors are complaining about the constant noise and banging." Amelia's face fell. "I'm sorry, I'll keep an eye on the volume, I promise," she said. "But please, just look at them. They're smiling for the first time in days." Richard glanced briefly at his sons, who were looking at him with frozen curiosity. He saw only a violation of the order he had established. "Just tidy up here and get dinner ready," he ordered, turning and leaving the room. Amelia kept her word. Now, during the day, the music played so quietly that it could hardly be called noise, but the vibrations remained. The girl found a way to amplify them by placing wooden boards under the speaker legs, which turned the entire floor into a single resonating membrane. The boys were delighted. They no longer just clapped to the beat, but tried to move, stamp their feet, and spin around. Every day, Amelia came up with something new. They lay down on the floor to feel the rhythm with their backs. They leaned balloons against the speaker and watched them vibrate. Leo and Sam were transformed. Their eyes lit up, and they began to actively use the gestures they had been taught at school, but had previously neglected. They even came up with their own signs to indicate their favorite melodies. On Saturday afternoon, without warning, Eleanor, Richard's older sister, arrived at the house. She was met with a surprising sight in the living room. Amelia, Leo, and Sam were crawling on the floor, pushing tennis balls in front of them, which bounced to the beat of the muffled bass. "Good afternoon," Eleanor said, loudly enough to be heard over the noise. Amelia jumped to her feet, her cheeks flushed. "Mrs. Davenport, I apologize for the mess. We got a little carried away. Call me Eleanor, dear." She waved her hand dismissively, looking at her nephews with genuine amazement. "What are you doing here?" The boys ran up to their aunt when they saw her. Leo took her hand and placed it on his chest, where the vibrations were strong. Then he pointed to the speaker and smiled broadly. Sam jumped up and down on the spot, pretending to be a tennis ball. Eleanor laughed. "Wow, they're trying to explain something to me. Richard said you had a way with them, but I didn't think it was this much." "We're just learning to listen differently," Amelia replied, embarrassed. That evening, they had a serious conversation. "Richard, this girl is amazing," Eleanor said when she and her brother were alone. "I've never seen the boys so excited." "She just lets them do whatever they want," he objected, looking through his work emails on his laptop. "The whole house is in chaos. The neighbors look at me like I'm a public enemy." "Stop thinking about the neighbors. Think about the children. They're happy. Can't you see that?" "All I see is chaos and a lack of discipline," Richard retorted. The last nanny, Miss Evans, had 3 degrees and followed a strict schedule. "And the boys sat with her like 2 little statues," Eleanor countered. "Richard, open your eyes. This girl is doing what neither psychologists nor teachers could do. She's giving your sons back their childhood. Or just destroying my home," he muttered, closing his laptop. "Let's see what their school teacher has to say next week." The teacher, Mrs. Green, called herself on Tuesday. Richard was in an important meeting when his phone vibrated. He ignored the call, but the woman was persistent. Stepping out into the corridor, he answered irritably, "Mr. Davenport, this is Julia Green, Leo and Sam's teacher," came the excited voice on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry to bother you during work hours, but I just had to share this. Has something happened?" Richard tensed. "Yes, something has happened. But it's incredible. Your boys, they've opened up. They're much more responsive, using gestures and trying to interact with other children. Their progress over the last 2 weeks has been phenomenal. What's going on at home? Have you hired a new specialist?" Richard was taken aback for a moment. He had expected anything, complaints, problems, but not this. "No, we just have a new nanny," he replied cautiously. "Well, please convey my sincere gratitude and admiration to this nanny," Mrs. Green said emotionally. "Her methods, whatever they may be, are working wonders. Keep up the good work." After hanging up, Richard felt a pang of pride for his sons, but he immediately convinced himself that it was all thanks to the school, intensive lessons, anything but the strange games of an uneducated young girl. In the evening, when Amelia timidly asked if the school had called, he just threw over his shoulder, "Yes, they called." Mrs. Green noted an improvement. Apparently, the school program was finally beginning to bear fruit. He didn't see the spark of hope fade in her eyes for a moment. He simply wasn't looking in her direction. Richard's irritation built up gradually, like static electricity. He would come home and find new traces of Amelia's creativity, handprints on the windows fogged up by the bass, pots and pans scattered throughout the living room, which the boys used as drums, leaning their heads against them. Every evening, he listened to her enthusiastic reports with a stony face. Today, Leo came up with a rhythm all by himself for the first time, she said at dinner. He tapped on the table and Sam tried to repeat it by stomping his feet. It was amazing. "Very informative," Richard replied without looking up from his steak. "Just don't forget to wipe the table afterwards." The boys, sensing his coldness, tried to break through to him. One evening, when he was sitting in his study working on an urgent project, they came in with Amelia. Leo was holding a small tambourine. He approached his father and tugged insistently at his sleeve, pointing to his bare feet. "What is it now?" Richard asked impatiently. "They want to show you something," Amelia said quietly. "It's their new dance." Leo began to beat the tambourine, creating a simple but clear vibration. Sam, standing nearby, began to stamp his feet and spin around in time to the music. He looked straight at his father, his eyes filled with desperate hope for approval. Richard rubbed his nose. His ears were still ringing from a difficult conversation with a client. "Children, I don't have time for this," he said sharply. "Amelia, please take them away and stop that banging." The hope in Sam's eyes turned to hurt. He stopped dancing and ran out of the office. Leo threw his tambourine forcefully on the floor and followed his brother. "But they were trying so hard," Amelia whispered. "My sons should be learning maths, not tapping rhythms on the floor," he snapped. "It's your job to make sure they do." The last straw was the day of their appointment with Dr. Ramirez, a leading audiologist whom Richard had had great difficulty finding. The appointment was for 3 o'clock, and he reminded Amelia of it several times. "This is very important," he emphasized in the morning before leaving for work. "Don't be late. Their further treatment depends on this visit." "Of course, Mr. Davenport. I remember everything," his girlfriend assured him. "We'll leave early." It was a sunny day, and Amelia decided to organize dancing in the yard. She took the speaker out onto the terrace, and the boys, inspired by the open space, ran around on the grass, inventing new moves. They were so absorbed and happy that Amelia lost track of time. She only came to her senses when her phone vibrated in her pocket. Richard's name appeared on the screen. "Amelia, where are you?" he asked in an icy tone. "I just got a call from the clinic. You missed your appointment." Amelia felt a chill inside. She looked at her watch. It was almost 4 o'clock. "Oh my God, Mr. Davenport, we got carried away. I'm so sorry. We'll be right there." "No need," he snapped. "The next appointment with Dr. Ramirez is in 3 months. 3 months, Amelia. Do you realize what you've done?" There was no shouting in his voice, but his calmness sent a chill down her spine. I don't know what to say. Please forgive me," she stammered, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. "This conversation is over. Be home when I get back," he said, and hung up. The rest of the day passed in oppressive silence. Sensing her state, the boys quieted down and didn't leave her side. When Richard's car tires crunched on the driveway, Amelia felt her heart sink. She was prepared for the worst. He entered the house without even looking at her. His face was like a mask. "Pack their things for the night," he ordered. "Eleanor will take them. I want to talk to you alone." Amelia nodded silently and went upstairs. Half an hour later, Eleanor arrived. She gave her brother a worried look, hugged her clueless nephews, and took them away, promising to call Amelia. When the door closed behind them, a ringing silence fell over the house. "Mr. Davenport, I swear I didn't mean to," she began. "Your intentions are irrelevant," Richard interrupted her. "Only your actions matter, and your actions today showed blatant unprofessionalism and irresponsibility. This is about my children's health, not a broken vase. I know, and I have no excuse. I am prepared to accept any punishment." He looked at her for a long time, and there was only cold weariness in his gaze. "I have made my decision, Amelia, but I will inform you of it tomorrow morning. I don't want to speak in the heat of the moment." He turned and went into his study, closing the door firmly behind him. Amelia remained standing in the middle of the living room, completely crushed. She knew what his decision would be. It was the end. Richard sat in his study for several hours, staring at a single point. He replayed all the events of the last few weeks in his head. He recognized that the boys had changed, but the price of those changes seemed too high to him. The mess, the complaints from the neighbors, and now this breakdown. He opened his laptop and began searching for CVS of new candidates. Qualified, experienced, predictable. Those who would follow the rules. Late in the evening, he left the house and drove to a 24-hour shopping center. He wandered between the aisles until he saw a large teddy bear with kind eyes. He bought it, not quite understanding why. Perhaps it was a way of apologizing to his sons for another loss in their lives. Returning to his car, he placed the bear on the passenger seat and drove home, ready to dot the I's and cross the T's tomorrow morning. The night was long and quiet, too quiet. Amelia lay awake, sitting on her bed in her small room, staring out the window. She didn't cry. She had run out of tears yesterday. Inside, there was only a ringing emptiness, similar to the silence in which Leo and Sam lived. With the first rays of the sun, she got up and began to pack her few belongings into an old sports bag. She acted mechanically, like a machine. Folding the last t-shirt, she looked around the room that had never become her home and went out into the corridor. The silence of the huge house was deafening. There was no muffled thumping of bass, no patter of little feet. Richard hadn't slept either. He had spent the night in his study, trying unsuccessfully to concentrate on his work. The laptop screen displayed the resumes of nannies with impeccable references, but their faces seemed alien and lifeless to him. A teddy bear sat on the chair opposite, silently reproaching him with its glass eyes. He hated the silence. It used to be synonymous with order for him, but now it seemed like a sign of desolation. Around 8 in the morning, the phone rang. It was Eleanor. "Richard, you have to do something," she began without preamble. His sister's voice sounded tense. "I don't know what's going on with them. They refuse to eat. They're sitting in the corner, staring at one spot. Sam has been holding that little tambourine in his hands all night." "They'll get used to it," Richard replied wearily, rubbing his temples. "Children adapt quickly." "Not these children, Richard, and you know it," she objected. "They've only just started to come out of their shells. Leo has been showing me a gesture all morning that I can't understand. He folds his arms across his chest and then spreads them wide, as if something is exploding. He does it over and over again, and there are tears in his eyes." Richard was silent. He remembered Amelia describing their new game. They called it heartbeat. They would put their hands on their chests to feel the vibration, and then explode it in a dance. "He's asking about Amelia," Richard said hoarsely. "Then bring her back," Eleanor almost shouted. "Listen, I understand she made a mistake, a big mistake, but does one mistake negate all the good she has done for them? Have you even talked to her? Have you asked her why it happened? What difference would that make?" "It makes all the difference. You're acting like an insensitive robot, not a father. You're hiding behind your rules because you're afraid to feel anything. Call her. Talk to them. Do something before it's too late." She hung up. Her words, harsh and unfair as they seemed to him, nevertheless, hit the mark. He got up and walked through the empty house. He looked into the playroom where a speaker lay forlornly on the floor. He went to the living room window and saw faint prints of children's hands on the glass. He went upstairs and stopped in front of Amelia's door. He had come to tell her to leave. He had to do it. At that moment, he heard the sound of a car pulling up and a door slamming. Richard frowned, expecting to see the courier, but instead Eleanor burst into the hall, followed by Leo and Sam, like two little ghosts. "I can't stand this anymore," she declared, folding her arms across her chest. "These are your children, Richard. Your responsibility. Deal with it yourself." The boys did not rush to their father when they saw him. They looked around fearfully, their eyes searching for someone else. Not finding anyone, they ran away. Not to him, but up the stairs. Richard watched in bewilderment as they rushed past him. At that moment, Amelia's door opened. She stood in the doorway with her bag in her hand, pale and confused. Seeing her, the boys made a strange, sob-like sound and rushed to her. They hugged her legs, clinging so tightly as if they were afraid she would disappear. Leo desperately pounded his chest with his fist, showing his heartbeat. Sam just cried, silently and bitterly. Amelia knelt down, hugging them in return. She looked at Richard over their heads, and there was such pain and love for these children in his eyes that it took her breath away. She said nothing. She just stood up, took the boys by the hand, and led them away. Not to their room, not to the playroom. She led them downstairs to the kitchen. Richard, leaving his sister in the hallway, slowly followed them, not knowing why. He was still clutching the teddy bear in his hand. Amelia entered the kitchen, sat the boys down on chairs, and went to the sideboard and took out a large glass vase. Filling it with water, she placed the vase in the middle of the huge kitchen island. Then she brought her old speaker from the playroom and set it down next to it. She turned on the music. The muffled, rhythmic bass filled the room. The water in the vase rippled gently. The boys watched this little miracle spellbound. "Look," Amelia said, her voice trembling. "You can see the music." She took Sam by the hand and helped him climb onto the table. Then, Leo, she stood there herself. The three of them stood on the cold stone, watching the dancing water, and Amelia began to move. Slowly, smoothly, in time with the vibration that came from the speaker through the stone to their bare feet. The boys watching her began to repeat her movements. And then, at that very moment, Richard entered the kitchen. He stopped at the doorway, ready to unleash his anger and put an end to this madness. But the words stuck in his throat. He did not see disorder. He saw a sacred ritual. He saw how three people, in a world that was completely silent to them, had found a way to communicate with each other in a language that did not need words. He saw pure, unclouded happiness on his sons' faces, the kind he hadn't seen since their mother was alive. And then he understood everything. He understood what Eleanor had been trying to tell him, what the teacher had been shouting at him, what the children themselves had been whispering to him with their dancing. He understood what a wall he had built around himself and them. The bear fell from his weakened hand, and the first tear in 2 years slowly rolled down his cheek. Richard's emotional outburst took everyone by surprise. When he sniffed and stepped into the kitchen, Amelia instinctively turned off the music. The vibration stopped, and the dance froze. The boys huddled fearfully against the girl, not understanding what was happening to their always so reserved father. Eleanor stood, frozen in the hallway, a silent shadow, afraid to disturb the fragile moment. "Continue," Richard said hoarsely, wiping his cheek with the back of his hand. "Please don't stop." Amelia hesitated. She looked at him, then at the boys, then at her sports bag standing alone by the door. Her gaze was a mixture of confusion, pity, and disbelief. "Mr. Davenport, I think you need to rest," she said softly. "It's been a difficult day for everyone." "No," he replied firmly. "I don't want to rest. I want to understand. I've been building walls for 2 years, and I've just realized that I've locked myself in, rather than protecting them." He walked over to the kitchen island, where his children were still standing. He hesitated to touch them. Leo and Sam looked at him warily. He was a stranger to them, an intruder on their territory. "Amelia, stay," he said, and it sounded less like an order than a request. "I was wrong. I was blind and deaf in every sense of the word. I behaved like an idiot. You were upset. I made a terrible mistake with the doctor's visit." "Mistake?" He smiled bitterly. "My biggest mistake was not seeing what was happening right under my nose. I hired you to take care of my children, and you taught them how to live, and I wanted to fire you for it." He looked at Eleanor. "Thank you for bringing them," he said to his sister. "You were right about everything." Eleanor just smiled faintly and nodded silently, letting them know she would leave them alone. She quietly left the house, closing the door behind her. An awkward silence fell over the kitchen. Richard, Amelia, and the boys, 4 people who didn't know how to proceed. "So, what about that visit?" Richard asked, breaking the silence. "Can we make another appointment?" "I called the clinic this morning while you were asleep," Amelia confessed. "I explained the situation and said it was entirely my fault." The administrator was understanding. She said, "Doctor, Ramirez had an opening in 2 weeks, on Wednesday at the same time." Richard looked at her in amazement. He had been prepared for months of waiting, for humiliating phone calls, and she had already taken care of everything. You did that even though you thought I might fire you?" "It doesn't matter," she replied with a shrug. "What matters is what Leo and Sam need. I would have called you anyway to let you know the new date." This simple act struck him more than the tears and dancing. It was caring, genuine, selfless caring that he had long forgotten. "All right," he said. "Wednesday. I'll cancel all my appointments. We'll go together. All of us." It was the first time he had used the word "we," and it sounded a little strange, but Right. He looked at the boys. Come on, get down from there, he said softly, holding out his arms to them. Sam, the more trusting of the two, reached out to him uncertainly. Richard carefully lifted him off the table and set him on the floor. Leo was still hesitant, looking back and forth between his father and Amelia. It's okay, Amelia said to him. Go to Daddy. Leo slowly slid off the table and stood next to his brother. Richard crouched down in front of them to be at their level. He didn't know what to say. All words seemed false to him, so he simply picked up the teddy bear he had dropped in the hallway. This is for you, he said, holding out the toy. I bought it yesterday. The boys looked at the bear curiously but did not take it. Instead, Leo raised his hand and made the heartbeat gesture again, looking his father straight in the eye. He wasn't asking for the toy. He was asking to share his world. And Richard understood. He slowly placed the bear on the floor. Then, copying his son's gesture, he put his hand on his chest. He did it awkwardly but sincerely. For the first time in a long time, a faint but genuine smile appeared on Leo's face. He walked over and placed his small hand on top of his father's large hand. Richard felt his heart beating loudly beneath their two palms, and at that moment he made his first silent pact with his children. The next morning began with an unusual awkwardness. For the first time in 2 years, Richard did not leave for the office before the children woke up. He went down to the kitchen in his home clothes and found Amelia there, already making breakfast. She flinched when she saw him. Good morning, Mr. Davenport, she said, more quietly than usual. Richard, he corrected her. Please call me Richard. And good morning, Amelia. He walked over to the coffee machine, feeling like a guest in his own home. He didn't know what to do next. Usually at this time of day, he was already reviewing reports and giving orders over the phone. Can I help you with anything? Amelia asked, flipping pancakes in a frying pan. No, thank you, he replied hastily. I'll just be here. He sat down at the table in the same place his sons had been standing yesterday. Soon they appeared. Seeing their father, the boys froze in the doorway. Yesterday's emotional outburst had given way to wariness. Richard smiled at them, trying to make the smile look natural. Good morning, gentlemen, he said. Of course they didn't hear him. Leo looked questioningly at Amelia. She smiled and made a gesture meaning, good morning. The boys approached the table uncertainly and sat down in their places. Breakfast was eaten in tense silence. Richard desperately tried to find a topic of conversation, but all his attempts seemed silly. The weather is nice today, he said, looking out the window. Yes, it's sunny, Amelia replied. The boys ate in silence. Richard felt like a complete failure. He could manage the construction of skyscrapers, but he couldn't connect with 2 7-year-old children. When breakfast was over, the boys got up and, out of habit, headed for the playroom. Wait, Richard stopped them. They turned around. He got up from the table. Amelia, I think I should have my first lesson today, he said, looking at her. If you don't mind. A look of surprise flashed across her face, replaced by a warm smile. Of course, Richard. A lesson is a lesson. They went into the living room. Amelia brought a speaker and played one of the tracks that the boys particularly liked. Deep, slow bass filled the room. Okay, rule number 1, she began, adopting a more businesslike tone. Take off your shoes. You need to feel the floor. Richard obediently took off his shoes. Rule number 2, close your eyes and don't think. Just feel. The vibration comes in waves. Try to catch it. He closed his eyes. At first he felt nothing but an annoying hum. His architect's brain tried to analyze the frequency, the amplitude to find a pattern. You're too tense, Amelia said. Relax your shoulders. Imagine you're standing on the deck of a ship, and the waves are rocking beneath you. He tried. He took a deep breath and tried to turn off his thoughts. And gradually, very slowly, he began to distinguish. It wasn't just a hum, it was a rhythm. Beat, pause, beat, beat, pause. It was slow, like the heartbeat of a giant. Now open your eyes, Amelia commanded. He opened them. Leo and Sam were sitting on the floor, watching him intently. There was no mockery in their eyes, only serious anticipation. "Now try to move, don't dance. Just sway to the beat of these waves," she continued. Richard felt incredibly foolish, a man in expensive loungewear swaying in the middle of his living room to inaudible music. But he looked at his sons and forced himself to make the first move. It was awkward. He swayed too sharply and lost the rhythm. Sam giggled quietly, covering his mouth with his hand. Richard wasn't angry. He smiled back. "Yes, I know it looks terrible," he admitted. "Maybe you can show us how it's done." He sat down on the floor next to them. Plucking up his courage, Leo approached his father and gently placed his hand on his chest. He nodded slightly and said quietly, "Feel it. 1, 2, 3. Then he began to tap rhythmically on his chest. Richard focused on these soft but distinct taps. Closing his eyes, he felt the rhythm coming from within. Now his movements no longer followed Amelia's instructions. They became natural, as his body instinctively synchronized with the pulsation. Almost an hour passed by like this, seated quietly on the floor, eyes shut tight, hand resting upon his child's chest. He immersed himself fully into listening deeply to the quietness surrounding them. Upon opening his eyes eventually, he found Amelia gazing tenderly at him, tears welling up in hers. "You're catching on," she murmured gently. "You're picking things up fast." Looking affectionately towards both of his boys, he answered simply, "I've got great teachers." That same day, for what felt like ages since last doing so, he canceled every single one of his scheduled business appointments. The first day turned into the second, and the second into the third. Morning training became as much a part of Richard's daily routine as brushing his teeth. He still felt clumsy, but with each passing day his movements became more confident. He learned to distinguish not just the rhythm, but its nuances, fast and staccato, like rain tapping on the roof, or slow and languid, like waves lapping at the shore. He no longer tried to analyze, he simply allowed his body to respond to the vibrations. The boys became his main mentors. They came up with tasks for him. With his eyes closed, he had to guess which track Amelia had put on, or repeat the rhythm they tapped out with their feet on the floor. These games brought them closer together than all the expensive toys and trips to amusement parks over the past 2 years. The atmosphere in the house also changed. The awkwardness between Richard and Amelia gradually disappeared, replaced by a quiet camaraderie. They began to talk. In the evenings, when the boys were asleep, they would sit in the kitchen with a cup of tea. Richard was surprised to find that he enjoyed listening to her. He learned that she had grown up in a small town, that she had a younger sister whose treatment required money, and that she had dreamed of becoming a professional dancer since childhood, but life had decided otherwise. "I went to a dance studio for 10 years, she said once, looking at her hands. "It was the only place where I felt truly alive." When you dance, you don't need words to express what's inside you. "It's similar to what Leo and Sam feel," Richard said thoughtfully. "Maybe," she nodded. "Only for them, it's not a choice, it's the only language they have." One evening, Richard noticed her old, worn-out ballet shoes, which she had left to dry by the fireplace. The toe of one of them was worn almost to a hole. He didn't say anything, but the thought stuck in his mind. His complete immersion in family life did not go unnoticed at work. A week later, Mark, his partner at the architectural firm, called him. "Richard, mate, where have you been?" came the cheerful voice on the other end of the line. "We've got a project for the town hall building on fire and your phone is silent. Is everything okay?" "Yes, Mark, everything's fine," Richard replied calmly, watching Leo and Sam build a sandcastle in the yard under Amelia's supervision. "I just took a little vacation." "A vacation? In the middle of the most important project in the last 5 years?" Mark's voice sounded puzzled. "This isn't like you. Is something wrong with the boys?" "The boys are better than ever," Richard replied, his voice filled with undisguised warmth. "You know, I'm learning a new language." "A new language? Have you decided to learn Chinese for the negotiations?" Richard chuckled. "No, Mark. The language is much more complicated than that. I'm learning to talk to my children." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Okay, I understand," Mark finally said, his tone becoming more serious. "That's right, Richard. We'll get through this. Just let me know when you're back on your feet. I'll be back, but maybe as a slightly different person, Richard said, and hung up, feeling incredibly relieved. The day of the visit to Dr. Ramirez was approaching. This time, everyone was preparing for it together. Richard took on the role of organizer, but now he didn't give orders. He consulted with Amelia. "I think we need to explain everything to them in advance," he said in the evening, "so that it doesn't become stressful for them." "But how?" "We can dance it," Amelia suggested. Richard thought the idea was brilliant in its simplicity. The next day they put on a whole performance. Amelia portrayed the kind doctor using smooth and calm vibrations. Richard played the role of a big and scary machine, making a loud but not frightening hum. And the boys were the main characters, who were a little scared at first, but then realized that they were in no danger. They repeated this rehearsal several times, and by Wednesday, Leo and Sam were no longer afraid of the upcoming visit, but were looking forward to it with curiosity. On the day of the appointment, Richard, Amelia, and the boys arrived at the clinic half an hour before the scheduled time. Richard held both sons by the hand. In the waiting room, full of anxious parents, their small group looked surprisingly calm and united. When they were invited into the office, Dr. Ramirez, an elderly man with kind eyes, looked at Richard with surprise. "Mr. Davenport, it's good to see you in person," he said. "Last time you were very busy." "Last time I was very foolish, Doctor," Richard replied, squeezing his son's hands tighter, "but I'm learning to correct my mistakes." The examination went surprisingly smoothly. Dr. Ramirez watched with professional curiosity as Amelia and Richard used gestures and touch to explain each of the doctor's actions to the boys. Instead of acting up, Leo and Sam looked at the complex equipment with interest, touched the cold metal surfaces, and showed no fear whatsoever. "Amazing," the doctor murmured, looking at the screen where the graphs were running. "They are completely calm. Usually, this is the most difficult part of working with young patients. Your preparation at home, your dance, as you called it, worked perfectly." Richard felt proud, not for himself, but for all of them, for his little team. "We just found a way to talk to them," he replied, "a way they understand. After all the tests, Doctor." Ramirez invited Richard and Amelia into his office, leaving the boys in the care of a nurse. He put on his glasses and laid the results out on the table. "I'll be frank with you, Mr. Davenport," he began seriously. "The physical damage to both boys' auditory nerves is significant. Standard methods, including the most powerful hearing aids, will unfortunately not have the desired effect here." Richard nodded silently, his heart sinking. He was prepared for this, but it still hurt to hear it. "However," the doctor continued, a new tone in his voice, "medicine is not standing still. There is one option. It is very new, experimental. I'm talking about a clinic in Switzerland where Professor Simon Weber performs unique operations. It involves a new generation of cochlear implants combined with targeted cell therapy to stimulate nerve endings. This won't restore their hearing 100%, please understand, but it's a chance that they will be able to distinguish speech, hear music, live in a world of sound. It's risky, expensive, and there are no guarantees, but it's the only real hope they have." Hope, this word, which he had long since buried, suddenly sounded with new, deafening force. He looked at Amelia. There were tears in her eyes, but they were tears of shock, not despair. "We'll do it," Richard said without hesitation. "What does it take?" "A lot of patience and even more money," the doctor replied honestly. "And preparation? The boys' brains are unaccustomed to sound. They will need to be prepared for this world, taught to listen just as you taught them to dance. Your method, it could be the key to successful rehabilitation after the operation. It's amazing, but you intuitively did exactly what was needed." He took out his business card and wrote his name and phone number on the back. "This is Dr. Evelyn Reed from the Research Institute. I've already spoken to her about you. She will help you with the scientific basis for training and rehabilitation. Perhaps your discovery will help not only your sons, but many other children as well." The drive home was tense and silent. The boys, exhausted, fell asleep in the back seat. Richard was driving, but his thoughts were far away at the Swiss clinic. Did you hear that? He finally said, turning to Amelia. There is hope. I heard, she exhaled. Richard, this could change everything. It already has, he said firmly. Now we have a goal. A real shared goal. He stopped the car at a traffic light and turned to her. Amelia, I want to make you an offer. I've been thinking about it for a long time. If it's about a pay rise, don't bother, Richard. You're already very generous. No, it's more than that. You said you dreamed of becoming a dancer. She looked down, embarrassed. Dreams stay in childhood. Not always, he said firmly. I want you to go back to school, dance school. I found one that has a special program in dance movement therapy. I'll pay for your tuition. You should become the best specialist. For them, for yourself, for all the children we can help. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of gratitude and determination, not grief. She couldn't say a word, only nodded silently several times. Amelia gently touched the smooth satin surface of the pointe shoes with her fingers. They were perfect. She hadn't held anything like this in her hands for many years, a forgotten feeling of excitement and trepidation mixed with sudden fear. It was too real. I don't know what to say, Richard, she whispered, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. They're beautiful, but I can't accept them. Why not? He asked gently. I thought you would like them. I don't just like them. But this is a commitment. I haven't really danced in ages. What if I've forgotten everything? What if I go to this school and turn out to be the oldest and clumsiest student? What if I let you down? Her voice trembled. All the insecurity she had hidden behind her cheerful smile for so long came pouring out. Richard took a step towards her and gently took her hands. You won't let me down, Amelia. You can't let down someone who is already immensely grateful to you, he said firmly. And you won't be the oldest. You'll be the most experienced. You have something that 20-year-old students don't have. You have life experience and a real, hard-won understanding of why dance is necessary. You won't just be learning movements, you'll be learning to heal souls. First and foremost, your own. His words had a calming effect on her. She took a deep breath, trying to control her emotions. Thank you, she replied simply, clutching the box tighter. I'll try. I promise I'll try my best. I have no doubt, he smiled. Her first day at the Academy of Contemporary Dance turned out to be exactly as she had feared, and at the same time completely different. She really was older than most of the students in her group. The girls in their perfect leotards and immaculate hairstyles looked at her with polite curiosity. Amelia felt like an imposter in her old leggings and plain t-shirt, but when the lesson began, everything changed. The teacher, Madame Dubois, a strict woman with the bearing of a queen, gave them complex combinations of movements. Amelia was surprised to discover that her body remembered everything. Yes, she lacked her former flexibility, and her breathing was faster, but her muscle memory, honed by years of training, did not let her down. She did not move as technically as the others, but her dance had something they did not have: history. Not bad for a start, Mademoiselle Rose, said Madame Dubois after class, as Amelia, breathing heavily, tried to catch her breath. You have a good foundation, but you lack confidence. You hide behind your movements, afraid to show yourself. Dance is not a sport, it is a confession. I want to see your confession. These words made Amelia think. That evening, in their new yellow hall, she tried to explain this to Richard and the boys. She said I should confess in dance, she said, speaking more to herself than to them. But what can I tell? Tell them everything you know, said Richard. He turned on the speaker, choosing a calm, deep rhythm. Tell them about loneliness, about hope, about what it's like to find your voice when everyone around you is silent. And Amelia began to dance. She closed her eyes and stopped thinking about correct positions and beautiful lines. She moved as her body told her to. Her dance told of a lost dream, of hard work, of despair. And then new notes appeared in it: surprise, the joy of discovery, tenderness. Leo and Sam, sensing the change in vibrations, approached and gently touched her. They became part of her dance, part of her story. Richard looked at them, and it seemed to him that he was seeing a sculpture of a family come to life. Every evening, Amelia brought home new knowledge. She learned about the theory of muscle armor, about the connection between tension in the body and suppressed emotions, about how rhythm can synchronize breathing and heartbeat. She immediately turned all this into games for the boys. They built fortresses out of pillows and then destroyed them with sharp, powerful movements, releasing tension. They learned to draw with vibrations in the air, developing coordination and imagination. "Just look at them," Eleanor said enthusiastically, who now often came to visit them. "They've become so different. Sam is a real lyricist, all his movements are smooth and gentle, and Leo is a rebel. He likes sharp, strong rhythms. It's incredible how dance has revealed their characters." "It's all Amelia," Richard replied. "She didn't just give them a language, she gave them the freedom to be themselves." One evening, sitting in the kitchen, Richard placed Dr. Ramirez's business card in front of Amelia. "Maybe it's time?" he asked. Amelia looked anxiously at the name of Doctor. "Evelyn Reed." "I don't know, Richard. Are we ready? It's all so homely. What can we show a real scientist?" "We'll show her the truth," he said confidently. "We'll show her two happy boys. No graphs or studies could be more convincing. I'll call with you if you want." His support gave her courage. The next day she dialed the number. The voice on the other end of the line was warm and friendly. Dr. Reed listened to her rambling story with genuine interest. "That sounds fantastic, Miss Rose," she said. "We've been writing theoretical papers about sensory integration for years, and you've just gone and put it into practice. I would very much like to come and see it with my own eyes. Would you mind if I brought along a graduate student who is writing his dissertation on this topic?" They agreed to meet in a week. The news excited the whole house. Preparations began, similar to rehearsals before an important premiere. "No performance," Richard warned immediately. We won't be pretending anything. We'll just show her our usual day, our morning lesson, our games." But the excitement was still in the air. 2 days before the visit, something happened that no one expected. During another rehearsal in the hall, Sam, always so gentle and obedient, suddenly stopped in the middle of a movement, sat down on the floor, wrapped his arms around his knees, and flatly refused to continue. He didn't cry. He just pressed his lips stubbornly together and stared at one spot. "What's wrong, dear?" Amelia asked, sitting down next to him. He didn't respond. Leo came over and gently shook his shoulder, but Sam only curled up tighter. "Maybe he's tired," Richard suggested. "No, that's not it," Amelia shook her head. "He's scared. It seems he understands the importance of this visit, and the pressure is too much for him." They tried to persuade him, offering his favorite tunes, but the boy was adamant. He built an invisible wall around himself. He was quiet and distant all evening. He hardly ate anything at dinner. Late in the evening, when Amelia had gone to her room, Richard went into his son's bedroom. Leo was already asleep, and Sam was sitting on his bed looking out of the window. Richard sat down next to him without turning on the light. He didn't try to talk. He just put his hand on his back and began to pat him slowly in time with his own heartbeat. 1, 2, 3. It was the simplest rhythm they had learned, the rhythm of calm. Sam didn't move, but Richard could feel the tense muscles under his palm gradually relax. He continued patting. 10 minutes, 20, half an hour. He didn't look at his watch. He just stayed with his son, speaking to him in the only language they both understood now. Finally, Sam took a deep breath and leaned his head against his father's shoulder. Richard hugged him. He didn't need words to say, "I'm with you. Everything will be fine. You don't have to prove anything." And the boy understood him. The next morning, Sam was himself again. He ate his breakfast with a smile and was the first to run to the dance hall. The crisis was over. At exactly 11 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Richard opened the door. Standing on the threshold was an elegant woman in her 50s with lively, intelligent eyes, and next to her was a young man with a notebook. "Mr. Davenport? I'm Evelyn Reed," the woman introduced herself. "And this is my assistant, Thomas. I hope we're not disturbing you too much." "Not at all, Dr. Reed," Richard smiled, stepping aside. "Come in. We've been expecting you." Richard led the guests into their new dance hall, bright yellow walls, soft lighting, and the smell of wood created a warm and cozy atmosphere. Dr. Reed looked around with interest, her professional eye noting the thoughtfulness of every detail, from the vibroacoustic floor to the tactile panels on the walls. Young assistant Thomas, on the other hand, remained skeptical, busily opening his notebook. Amelia and the boys were already there. They were sitting on the floor in a circle, and Amelia was showing them how to create different vibration intensities using small drums. "We didn't want to put on a special show for you," Richard began, addressing Evelyn. "We'll just show you what our usual day is like. Where we start." "That's the best approach, Doctor." Reed nodded, settling into one of the soft poofs Richard had placed for the guests. Observation in a natural environment always provides more information. Amelia smiled at the guests and turned on the music, the room filled with a soft but deep and enveloping rhythm. She began with a simple warm-up that they did every morning. Light swaying, stretching, breathing exercises, synchronized with the pulsing of the floor. Dr. Reed watched silently, her eyes following every movement closely. Thomas scribbled something quickly in his notebook. After a few minutes, Amelia made the task more challenging. "Okay, now let's tell a story," she said. Even though she knew the boys couldn't hear her, she used gestures. "Let's talk about yesterday, about how Sam was scared." She looked at Sam, seeking his approval. The boy was confused for a moment, but then nodded decisively, and something incredible began. It was no longer just a dance, it was a dialogue. Leo started first. He portrayed fear, sharp, offbeat movements. He curled up into a ball as if trying to hide. Sam responded. His dance was different. He didn't show fear itself, but the wall he had built around himself. He moved slowly, shutting himself off from his brother and the whole world. Then Richard joined the dance. He didn't try to break down the wall. He approached Sam and began to move in his slow, heavy rhythm. He showed how he sat next to him in the dark, how he put his hand on his back. His movements were filled with calmness and acceptance, and in the finale, Sam, feeling this support, slowly opened up. He reached out to his father, and they ended the dance in an embrace. When the vibration subsided, silence hung in the room. Thomas stopped writing and stared at them with his mouth open. Dr. Evelyn Reed slowly removed her glasses, and Richard saw that her eyes were shining. This is more than I could have imagined," she said, shaken. "You're not just using vibration as a stimulus. You've created a complete sign system based on it. It's a language, a real, living language capable of conveying not only commands, but also complex emotions, memories, abstract concepts." "We're just playing," Amelia said, embarrassed. "No, dear, you're not playing. You're doing science," Evelyn replied. She turned to her assistant. "Thomas, do you see? All our theories about neuroplasticity, about sensory substitution, here they are in action. This isn't a controlled experiment in a sterile laboratory. This is life." At this point, Thomas, having recovered from his initial shock, decided to weigh in. "This is certainly very touching, Doctor Reed," he began in a slightly condescending tone. "And as a case study for my dissertation, it's invaluable. But we must remain objective. The lack of a control group, standardized metrics. We cannot draw global conclusions based on one, albeit very close-knit, family. Perhaps the boys would have progressed just as well with traditional methods, but they were lucky to have a sensitive nanny." At that moment, something inside Richard exploded. The old, cynical Richard, who had said almost the same thing a few months ago, was dead and gone. "Traditional methods?" he asked, his voice sounding metallic. "Do you know what your traditional methods mean to a father? It's when you get a report once a week with graphs where dry numbers show how much your child is behind the norm. It's when the best specialists in the country look at your children as if they were broken machines that need to be repaired. They didn't see Leo and Sam, they only saw the diagnosis." He stepped forward, his eyes burning. "Amelia was the first to see them not as a diagnosis, but as two boys who want to play. This language, as you call it, was not born out of scientific theories. It was born out of despair, hope, and love. You can measure it with your metrics, write dissertations about it, but you will never understand its essence if you look at it as a case study. This is not a case study, young man. This is my family. There was a deafening silence. Amelia looked at Richard with admiration. He defended their world with the same passion with which he had previously defended his architectural projects. Richard is right, she added softly but confidently, turning to Thomas. But I understand your position too. I'm studying this myself at the academy right now. What we do can be described in scientific terms. It's a method of sensorimotor correction through proprioceptive and vibrotactile stimulation aimed at developing nonverbal communication and emotional intelligence. But you know what? None of these terms can describe the feeling when your child, who has been silent for 2 years, tells you for the first time in a dance how his day went. Dr. Reed stood up and walked over to Richard. Your father would have been very proud of you, Mr. Davenport, she said, referring to her colleague who had once advised Richard to seek her help. And you are absolutely right. We scientists sometimes forget the most important thing behind our schedules, the person. Thank you for reminding me of that. She turned to Amelia. And thank you, Miss Rose. You are a natural. I want to make you an offer. Our institute is ready to allocate a grant for a full-fledged study of your methodology. We want to create a pilot group based in this hall to work with other children. We will provide you with all the necessary equipment and methodological support, and you will be the heart of this project. We want you to lead it. Amelia listened to her, and the ground was falling away beneath her feet. An uneducated nanny, a girl who, not long ago, didn't know how to pay for her flat, to lead a scientific project. I can't do it, she stammered. You can, Evelyn said firmly, and we'll help you. Thomas will be assigned to your project. He'll be responsible for data collection and the scientific basis, and you'll be responsible for what you do best, the magic. She held out her hand to Amelia. So, Miss Rose, shall we try to change the world? Amelia looked at Richard for support. He nodded encouragingly. She looked at Leo and Sam, who were watching curiously. Then, taking a deep breath, she shook the outstretched hand. Let's try, she replied. When the guests left, only 4 people remained in the sunlit hall. The air was thick with unspoken emotions. Amelia still couldn't believe what had happened. Richard approached her and simply stood beside her, looking at the boys. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. You should be thanking me, she replied, smiling through her tears. You gave me a chance I could never have dreamed of. We gave each other that chance, he corrected. At that moment, Leo, sensing the joyful atmosphere, ran up to the speaker and pressed the button. The hall filled with their favorite cheerful, fast-paced rhythm. He grabbed his father's hand, urging him to dance. Sam ran up to Amelia, and they began to dance, all 4 of them. It was a dance of pure, unadulterated happiness, a dance of a family that had gone through silence and learned to speak the language of the heart. Richard spun Leo around in the air, and his silent laughter was the most beautiful music in the world to him. The trip to the Swiss clinic became their shared endeavor. Richard sold his stake in a major project to cover the enormous expenses, and this decision came surprisingly easily to him. Material assets no longer seemed to him to be a measure of success. Success was the hope in his son's eyes. The Yellow Room Center was headed by Thomas, who had matured and become imbued with the idea, while Eleanor took care of all the household chores. The community of parents that Richard had managed to create surrounded them with incredible support. They organized charity fairs, helped with things, and simply came to hug them and wish them luck. Amelia threw herself into developing a preparatory program. Together with Dr. Reed, they created a whole set of exercises. Now they weren't just dancing. They were learning to associate vibrations with specific images. A low, drawn-out rhythm was a big dog, a frequent ringing rhythm was rain, and a sharp, short rhythm was a ball. The boys' brains had to learn to process sensory information, so that later, when the real sounds appeared, they would not be shocked, but would have ready-made shelves for their recognition. The months of preparation flew by like a single day. Their whole life was now devoted to a single goal. The four of them lived in a small rented flat in a quiet suburb of Geneva. Richard gave up work completely, devoting all his time to his sons. Amelia became their therapist, teacher, and closest friend all at once. The tension before the operations grew, but they coped with it together, turning fear into dance and anxiety into rhythm. One evening, on the eve of Leo's first operation, Richard and Amelia sat on the balcony, looking at the distant alpine peaks. "Are you scared?" Amelia asked quietly. "Very," he replied honestly. "I'm scared that it won't work. And I'm even more scared that it will. We're so used to our quiet world. What will happen when sounds burst into it? Will we be able to cope?" "We'll cope," she said confidently, placing her hand on top of his. "We'll teach them not only to hear, but to listen. We'll teach them to distinguish noise from music and screams from laughter. We'll be there, together." There was so much strength and tenderness in her voice that all his fears receded. He looked at her tired but beautiful face in the light of the sunset, and realized that he could no longer imagine his life without her. "Amelia," he began, his voice trembling, "when this is all over, when we get home, marry me." She didn't answer. Only her tears fell on his hand. But in those tears was her consent. The operations were successful. Professor Weber, a world-renowned surgeon, did everything he could. But the most difficult part was yet to come. A month later, when everything had healed, the day came to activate the implants. They sat in the audiologist's office, Richard, Amelia, and the boys. The doctor connected the wires to the small processors behind their ears. "I'll start at the lowest level," he warned. "The first sounds may be strange and even unpleasant for them." He pressed a button on the computer. Leo and Sam flinched simultaneously. Their eyes widened. There was no joy in them, only shock and confusion. They could hear. They didn't understand what, but for the first time in many years, their brains were assaulted by chaotic, incomprehensible white noise. Leo covered his ears with his hands in fear, though it didn't help. Sam cried out loud, something he had never done before. Amelia and Richard, ready for this, knelt down in front of them. They didn't say anything. They just started doing what they had rehearsed hundreds of times. Richard took out a small drum and began tapping out the familiar rhythm of the heartbeat. Amelia placed the boy's hands on her chest, where her heart was beating loudly. Vibration and sound. Now they were together. The boys gradually calmed down. The noise ceased to be just noise. It took on a familiar rhythm. Their rhythm. It was their first anchor in a new sounding world. 2 years passed. The Yellow Room Sensory Communication Center became an international project. Amelia and Richard's methodology, honed by the experience of their own children and dozens of others, received official recognition. Now families from all over the world came here. Amelia defended her dissertation and became Dr. Rose Davenport. But to all the children she remained simply Amelia, who teaches them to tell stories without words. Leo and Sam wore their speech processors as naturally as other children wear glasses. Their hearing was not perfect, but they learned to live with it. They could hear birds singing, the sound of rain, and, most importantly, the voices of their loved ones. Rehabilitation was long and difficult, but their unique training worked wonders. They learned to speak, and their first words were not mum or dad, but rhythm and dance. They went to a regular school and were incredibly popular because they could do something no one else could. They could listen with their whole bodies. One quiet autumn evening, the whole family gathered in their favorite yellow room. Richard brought his guitar. He had started taking lessons so he could share the world of music with his sons. He sat down on a pouf and played a simple chord. Amelia stood in the center of the room in her new point shoes. "Ready?" She smiled at her husband and children. They nodded. Richard began to play a simple, uncomplicated melody. Amelia began to dance. It was her dance of confession, which she had once rehearsed alone. But now it was different. There was no more pain and despair in it. There was strength, gratitude, and boundless love. Leo and Sam joined her. They moved to the beat of the music, which they now not only felt, but also heard. They spun around her, laughing no longer silently but loudly and contagiously. Richard looked at his wife and sons. He saw them dancing and heard them laughing, and he understood that long-ago day when he came home, crushed by grief, to fire the nanny, was not the end of his world, but its true beginning.